all of it, and right in the center, a big blue shape labeled Tract 14B. Lenny pointed at the notation in the margin. Look at this. Reserved for future county use, drainage retention, ownership to be determined upon infrastructure completion. I leaned closer. Infrastructure completion, what does that mean? Lenny pulled out another document, a memo from 1992. It means the county was supposed to decide whether to keep it as a public stormwater facility or transfer it to the HOA. But according to this memo, the infrastructure was never finished. The developer went bankrupt in 1991. The county never made a decision, so the parcel just sat there. I felt my pulse start to pick up. So who owns it now? Lenny pulled up the chain of title on his laptop. Nobody. The property was subdivided in 1987. Homes were built between 1990 and 1992. The HOA was incorporated in 1992. But Tract 14B was never transferred. It's been sitting as unassigned county land for 37 years. I stared at the map. 37 years. Brenda had been collecting fees on property the HOA didn't own for over 3 decades. I checked the tax records that afternoon. The county had never assessed property taxes on Tract 14B. No owner, no taxes. It was functionally abandoned land. Clarice confirmed it when I brought her the documents the next day. This is a quiet title action waiting to happen, she said. If no one comes forward to claim ownership, you can file to have the court declare you the legal owner. I blinked. I can buy it? She shook her head. You don't even have to buy it. You file the lawsuit, notify all potential interested parties, and if no one responds within the statutory period, the court grants you the title. It's how people clear up ownership on abandoned property. She walked me through the process. File a quiet title lawsuit in circuit court. Name all interested parties, which included the county, the HOA, and anyone else who might have a claim. Publish a notice in the newspaper. Wait 60 days. If no one contests it, the judge signs an order, and I become the owner of record. The filing fee was $450. I filed on May 15, 2024. The county had 60 days to respond. The HOA had 60 days to respond. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't post about it online. Didn't mention it to my neighbors. I just kept fishing, same as always. And I waited. The county responded on day 12. Their attorney sent a 1-page letter that basically said, "We don't want it. No objection to the petition." The HOA didn't respond at all. I found out later that Clarice had used the corporate registry address for the HOA, which hadn't been updated since 1998. The notice went to an abandoned office building in Tampa. Brenda never saw it. On day 61, Judge Harold Metzger signed the order granting me title to Tract 14B. I walked into the county clerk's office that afternoon and recorded the deed. 12 acres. Appraised value, $340,000. Owner, Marcus Webb. I drove home, made myself a sandwich, and went fishing. Brenda still didn't know. I kept fishing every morning. Same routine. 6 a.m., paddle out, cast my line, catch and release. I was curious how long it would take for someone to notice. Turns out about 3 weeks. Mid-June, I got another certified letter from the HOA. This one was even more aggressive than the last. It was a notice of a $5,000 fine for repeated and willful violations of community standards. It listed every single morning I'd been on the lake in the past month, 14 separate line items. It also included a formal notice that if I didn't pay within 10 days, the HOA would initiate lien proceedings against my property. I sat down at my kitchen table, pulled out the recorded deed, made a clean copy, and wrote a very short letter. Dear Silverbrook Estates HOA Board, per the attached recorded deed effective June 12, 2024, I am the legal owner of the property commonly known as the Silverbrook Lake official designation Tract 14B. Your HOA no longer has authority over this parcel. All previous fines issued in connection with this property are void. I will continue to use my property as I see fit. Any further harassment will be considered trespassing on private land. Sincerely, Marcus Webb. I sent it certified mail. Return receipt requested. Then I sat back and waited for the explosion. It came 48 hours later. An emergency HOA board meeting was called. I wasn't invited, obviously, but Janet, the secretary, gave me the highlights. Brenda stood up in front of the board, waved my letter around, and said I was trying to steal community property. She claimed I'd forged documents, that I was trying to scam the neighborhood, that this was some kind of elaborate fraud. The board voted to hire an attorney, not just any attorney. A big law firm out of Tampa, the kind that charges $400 an hour and wears suits that cost more than my truck. 3 days later, I got a cease and desist letter from Whitmore and Associates, attorneys at law. It was 8 pages long, full of words like tortious interference and unjust enrichment and fraudulent conveyance. The basic message was, stop claiming you own the lake, give back the deed, or we'll sue you into oblivion. I read the whole thing twice, then called Clarice. They're bluffing, she said. They don't have standing. You own the property. They can't sue you for owning property. I asked her what it would cost to defend a lawsuit if they actually filed one. She paused. Depends on how long it goes. Discovery, depositions, trial prep. Could be $50,000, maybe more. $50,000. I'm retired. I've got savings, but that would gut me. Brenda knew that. She was counting on me backing down. I wrote back to Whitmore and Associates. 1 sentence. See you in court. Bring your checkbook. I didn't hear anything for a week. Then, in early July, I got a citation from code enforcement. Mailbox was the wrong color. Citation. Trash can was visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup. Citation. Front porch light was too bright and constituting a nuisance. Citation. 8 violations in 2 weeks. Every single one filed by Brenda Kowalski. Every single one dismissed when I showed the inspector the actual code, but it didn't matter. It was harassment, it was retaliation, and it was all on the record. But Brenda wasn't done. She was about to pull the dirtiest trick in the HOA playbook. The notice came on a Saturday morning, slipped under every single door in Silverbrook Estates. Emergency special assessment vote in big red letters across the top. The HOA was calling for a mandatory $500 special assessment from every household to fund a legal defense fund to protect community assets from external threats. 340 homes times $500. That's $170,000. The notice included a ballot and a prepaid return envelope. It also included a letter from Brenda that I have to admit was masterfully written. She didn't mention my name specifically. She just talked about how an outside individual was trying to steal the lake that families had been enjoying for 30 years, how property values would collapse if we lost access to the water, how this was about protecting our investments and our children's safety. She made it sound like I was some kind of corporate raider trying to fence off the lake and charge admission. The vote required 75% approval. It passed with 76%. I can't even blame my neighbors. Most of them had no idea what was actually happening. They just knew the HOA president was telling them their property values were at risk, and $500 seemed like a small price to pay for peace of mind. Suddenly, Brenda had a war chest, and she used it. In late July, the HOA filed an actual lawsuit against me. Not just threats this time, a real complaint, filed in circuit court, alleging unjust enrichment, theft by deception, and about 6 other causes of action that barely made sense. The theory was that because I'd been a county employee, I'd used insider knowledge to fraudulently acquire property that rightfully belonged to the HOA. It was nonsense, but it was expensive nonsense. Clarice estimated it would cost me at least $50,000 to defend, maybe more if it went to trial. My homeowner's insurance wouldn't cover it. Property disputes are explicitly excluded. I was looking at burning through a huge chunk of my retirement savings to defend property I legally owned. And the harassment got worse. The code enforcement officer who'd been filing all of Brenda's complaints, a guy named Derek something, started showing up at my house twice a week. He'd walk around with a clipboard, take pictures, write citations for things that weren't even violations. One time he cited me for having a non-conforming fence repair. I'd replaced a single picket that had rotted. He claimed I needed a permit. When I showed him the county code that said repairs under $50 don't require permits, he just shrugged and said, "Take it up with the hearing officer." It was death by 1,000 cuts. Every citation, even if dismissed, required me to take time to respond, to gather evidence, to show up at hearings. It was exhausting. And that's exactly what Brenda wanted. Meanwhile, my neighbors started avoiding me. I'd wave at someone across the street and they'd look away. People who used to stop and chat suddenly had somewhere urgent to be. I was the guy causing problems. The guy who wouldn't just pay the fine and move on. I started to understand how people give up. How they just pay whatever the HOA demands, sign whatever paper is put in front of them, because fighting is so much harder than surrendering. But here's the thing about being 67 years old and retired. I had nothing but time, and I had something Brenda didn't count on. 40 years of knowing exactly how local government works, and who to call when things don't smell right. Also, I'd been documenting everything. Every letter, every citation, every interaction, time-stamped photos, saved emails, recorded delivery confirmations. Clarice had told me to build a paper trail and I'd built a highway. Then, at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday in early August, someone slipped an envelope under my door. No name, no return address. Inside were 3 years of HOA meeting minutes, and page 47 was absolutely beautiful. The meeting minutes were a gift, not just because of what they said, but because of what they proved. These weren't public records. They were internal HOA documents, the kind that only board members were supposed to see, which meant someone on the inside had decided Brenda had gone too far. I read through them that night with a pot of coffee and a highlighter. Most of it was routine stuff: landscaping bids, budget approvals, complaint logs. But scattered throughout were little nuggets that, when you put them together, painted a very clear picture. In June 2022, the board had voted to pay Brenda's husband's LLC, Kowalski Consulting Solutions, $4,500 a month for community management advisory services. The vote was 3-1, with Janet abstaining. There was no description of what services were actually provided, no deliverables, no reports, no documentation, just $4,500 a month, every month for 3 years. That's $162,000. Then there was a meeting from April 2024, right after I'd gotten my first fine. The minutes noted a discussion of member compliance issues held in closed session. Closed session. Florida law requires HOA meetings to be open unless they're discussing specific legal matters or personnel issues. Discussing whether to fine a homeowner doesn't qualify. But what really caught my eye was a quote, attributed to Brenda, from that closed session. "We need to make an example of Mr. Webb to discourage future challenges to board authority. Make an example of me, in writing. I made copies of everything and called Deshaun Morris. Deshaun runs an investigative blog called Suncoast Accountability. He's 38, used to work for the Tampa Tribune before the paper downsized, and now he makes his living filing public records requests and exposing local government waste. He's not afraid of anyone, and he loves a good David versus Goliath story. I met him at a coffee shop and handed him the folder. He read through it once, then looked up at me. 'Where did you get this?' I shrugged. Someone who thought the public should know. Deshaun grinned. 'This is good. This is really good. Give me 48 hours. His article went live on a Thursday morning. The headline was Silverbrook HOA President Funneled $162K to Husband's LLC while fining residents. It included scanned copies of the meeting minutes, a breakdown of the consulting payments, and a comparison chart showing that the average lake maintenance fee in our county was $12 a month. Silverbrook charged $85. The article also included my side of the story, how I'd legally acquired the lake through a quiet title action, how Brenda had responded with fines and lawsuits, how the HOA had spent $170,000 of homeowner money to fight a battle they were going to lose. Deshaun ended the piece with a question. If the HOA never owned the lake, where did $346,000 a year in maintenance fees actually go? The article got picked up by Reddit that afternoon. By evening, it had 45,000 upvotes on the HOA Horror Stories subreddit. Someone made a TikTok video summarizing it. That hit 2.3 million views in 2 days. Local TV news called me. Channel 7 sent a reporter and a camera crew to my house. I met them at the lake, same spot where Brenda had called the cops on me 3 months earlier. The reporter asked me to explain what happened. I kept it simple. I'm a retired civil engineer. When the HOA tried to fine me for fishing, I did what any engineer would do. I checked the property records. Turns out the HOA had been charging 340 families for access to a lake they never owned. So I filed the legal paperwork, followed the process, and became the owner. Now they're suing me for legally purchasing abandoned property. You tell me who's in the wrong here. The quote that went viral, though, was this one. They called me a thief for owning property I legally purchased. Meanwhile, they've been charging families $85 a month for a lake they had no legal right to control. You tell me who the thief is. The story aired that night at 6 and 11. By morning, the state attorney general's office had opened an investigation into the HOA's finances. 48 hours after Deshaun's article dropped, 3 board members resigned. Brenda's attorney, the fancy firm from Tampa, withdrew from the case. And my mailbox started filling up with apology letters from neighbors. The emergency membership meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in the community center. I wasn't planning to go. I'd done my part. The investigation was underway, the board was collapsing, and Brenda was isolated. But Janet called me the night before and said, "Marcus, you need to be there. People want to hear from you." So I showed up. The room was packed. 250 people, maybe more, standing along the walls because there weren't enough chairs. I'd never seen that many neighbors in one place. Most HOA meetings got maybe 15 people if you were lucky. Brenda was sitting at the front table with the two remaining board members, both of whom looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. Her face was tight, her jaw set. She knew what was coming. Janet stood up and called the meeting to order. First item on the agenda was a motion to remove Brenda Kowalski as president for cause. The room went silent. One of the homeowners, a man named Paul who lived 3 streets over, stood up and read the list of causes. Misappropriation of funds, violation of open meetings law, retaliation against a homeowner for legally exercising his rights, failure to disclose conflicts of interest. The vote required a 2/3 majority of homeowners present. Janet called for a show of hands. I didn't vote. I'm not sure I was even allowed to, given the lawsuit, but I didn't need to. The motion passed with 87% in favor. Brenda stood up, said, "This is a witch hunt," and walked out. The room erupted in applause. Janet took over as interim president. 2 other homeowners, both retired professionals who'd been quietly disgusted with how Brenda ran things, were appointed to fill the vacant board seats. And then Janet did something I wasn't expecting. She turned to me and said, "Marcus, the board owes you an apology. We allowed this to happen. We should have asked questions years ago. On behalf of the HOA, I'm sorry." Then she asked the question I'd been waiting for. "What do you want?" I'd thought about this a lot over the past few weeks. I could keep the lake. Legally, it was mine. I could charge the HOA rent, or deny them access entirely, or sell it to a developer and walk away with $250,000. But that's not what Linda would have wanted. And honestly, it's not what I wanted either. I stood up. "I want 3 things," I said. "First, the HOA drops the lawsuit immediately." Janet nodded. "Done." "Second, I want a refund of every dollar I paid in lake fees. That's $5,100. She nodded again. "Done." "Third," I said, "I'm willing to grant the HOA a formal easement for lake access, but it comes with conditions." I pulled out a sheet of paper I'd prepared with Clarice. 1. No homeowner pays more than $15 a month for actual maintenance costs. No hidden fees, no consulting charges. 2. I retain veto power over any rule changes related to the lake. You want to ban fishing, ban kayaks, institute quiet hours? You run it by me first. 3. The easement is for 10 years, renewable. If the HOA violates the terms, I can revoke it. 4. The HOA pays for liability insurance and maintenance. I'm not managing a pond. And 5. I get to fish whenever I want. 365 days a year, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., no restrictions. I looked around the room. Take it or leave it. The board didn't even need to deliberate. Janet said, "We'll take it, gladly." The room voted to accept the terms, unanimous. But I wasn't done, because this was never really about the lake. The formal easement signing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Another special membership meeting, this time with a notary public and Clarice present to make sure everything was legally binding. The attendance was even higher than the last meeting. Over 200 people crammed into the community center. Local news was there. Deshaun was there with his laptop, live blogging the whole thing. And sitting in the back row, arms crossed, was Brenda Kowalski. She'd been removed as president, but she was still a homeowner. She had every right to be there. She just didn't have a vote anymore. Janet presented the easement agreement to the membership. 10 pages of legal language that Clarice had drafted, laying out every condition, every obligation, every protection, the monthly fee reduction from $85 to $15, the transparency requirements for the budget, the insurance obligations, my fishing rights. She put it to a vote. 312 homeowners in favor, 2 against. I didn't ask who the 2 were, but I had a guess. Then something happened I wasn't expecting. A man from the state attorney general's office stood up. His name was Robert Kellerman, and he introduced himself as a senior investigator for the Consumer Protection Division. "I apologize for interrupting," he said, "but I wanted to inform the membership that our investigation into the Silverbrook Estates HOA has concluded. We have referred criminal charges to the state attorney's office against Brenda Kowalski for misappropriation of homeowner funds and against her husband, Thomas Kowalski, for fraudulent billing practices." The room went dead silent. Kellerman continued, "Our audit found that over a 5-year period, approximately $127,000 in HOA funds were improperly diverted to Kowalski Consulting Solutions for services that were never rendered. Additionally, Ms. Kowalski failed to file required financial disclosures with the state for 3 consecutive years, which is a violation of Florida Statute 700 and 20.303. We're also referring the matter to the IRS for potential tax fraud." Brenda's face went white, then red, then something close to purple. She stood up. "This is insane," she said. Her voice was shaking. I was protecting property values. I was doing my job. This man, she pointed at me, tried to steal community property. I was defending this neighborhood. I'd been sitting quietly in the front row, but I couldn't let that stand. I stood up and turned to face her. "Brenda," I said, my voice calm, "you called the cops on a 67-year-old man for catching a base. You fined me $7,500 for using a kayak. You tried to put a lien on my house. You spent $500,000 of your neighbor's money trying to bully me into silence. And when that didn't work, you filed 8 bogus code violations in 2 weeks. Every one of them dismissed, just to harass me." I took a step closer. "But here's what you never understood. I don't want revenge. I don't want to destroy you. I never did. I just wanted to fish in peace. And when you made that impossible, I did what any reasonable person would do. I checked the paperwork, and you know what I found? You'd been charging 340 families $85 a month for 32 years to access a lake you didn't own. That's $11 million, Brenda. $11 million in fees, collected over 3 decades, for property the HOA had no legal right to control." I turned back to the room. "So let me ask all of you, how many of you actually used the lake?" About 40 hands went up out of 200 people. "How many of you are paying $85 a month for it?" Every hand in the room went up. "Under the new agreement, you'll pay $15 a month. That's $70 a month back in your pocket. $840 a year. For 340 families, that's $285,000 a year that stays with you instead of going into an HOA slush fund." I paused to let that sink in. "But here's what we're really going to do with this lake. We're not just going to fish in it. We're going to turn it into something that actually benefits this community." I nodded at Janet, who pulled up a slideshow on the projector. "First," I said, "we're partnering with the County Parks and Recreation Department to create a free fishing program for kids. I'm going to teach it. Every Saturday morning, any child in this neighborhood can come learn how to cast a line, identify fish species, practice catch and release. No charge." The room started to murmur with approval. "Second, we're working with a local environmental nonprofit to restore the shoreline with native plants. That improves water quality, attracts wildlife, and makes the lake healthier for everyone." I clicked to the next slide. "Third, we're installing an ADA-accessible fishing dock. I designed it. It'll be built by a local contractor using money saved from the reduced fees." Another click. "And fourth, we're hosting an annual Silverbrook Community Day Festival at the lake. Food trucks, live music, kids' activities, and a fishing derby. First one is scheduled for September." I looked around the room. "This lake can be what it was always supposed to be. A place that brings people together, not a weapon for a board president to wield against anyone who questions her authority." The room erupted in applause. People stood up. Some were crying. I saw neighbors hugging each other. And in the back, Brenda Kowalski grabbed her purse and walked out. The TV cameras followed her to the parking lot. That footage of her getting into her car and speeding away while reporters shouted questions became a meme within hours. But the best part, that happened 3 weeks later. The first Linda's Lake Community Day was held on a Saturday in mid-September. The weather was perfect. Low 80s, light breeze, not a cloud in the sky. We'd renamed the lake the week before at a small ceremony, just me, Janet, and a few neighbors. We planted a bronze plaque on a stone near the main dock. Linda's Lake, in memory of Linda Webb, who loved the water and believed in bringing people together. I stood there for a long time that morning, just looking at her name in the sunlight, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Peace. By 10 a.m., the festival was in full swing. We had 5 food trucks parked along the main path. A local band was playing on a small stage we'd set up near the pavilion. Kids were running everywhere, faces painted, eating snow cones, chasing each other around the lake. And at the new fishing dock, the one I'd designed and that the HOA had paid to install using money saved from the fee reduction, I was teaching my first official fishing clinic. 43 kids signed up, 43, ages 6 to 14, all of them holding rods that were probably taller than they were, all of them looking at me like I was about to teach them magic. I showed them how to tie a clinch knot, how to cast without hooking someone behind them, how to feel the difference between a nibble and a strike, how to reel in slow and steady, not fast and jerky. And when an 8-year-old girl named Sophie hooked her first base, a nice 2-pounder, and screamed with joy as she pulled it up onto the dock, I felt Linda there with me. I swear I did. By the end of the day, we'd had over 500 people show up, not just from Silverbrook, but from neighboring subdivisions too. The County Parks and Recreation Director, A woman named Michelle Torres pulled me aside and said the county wanted to make this an annual partnership. They'd provide free fish stocking, water quality testing, and educational materials if we kept the youth program running. I said yes immediately. The environmental nonprofit planted 200 native shrubs around the shoreline over the next month. Volunteers from the neighborhood showed up every weekend to help. The lake started to look less like a retention pond and more like an actual ecosystem. We saw herons, turtles, dragonflies. The water quality test showed a 40% improvement in just 6 months. But the biggest change wasn't the lake. It was the neighborhood. People started talking to each other again. The monthly lake cleanup days drew 30 or 40 volunteers. The HOA meetings, which used to be Brenda's one-woman show with a handful of board attendees, now regularly had 50 or 60 people participating. Janet ran for official election as president and won with 92% of the vote. The HOA launched a transparency portal on their website where every budget line item, every meeting minute, every contract was posted for members to see. No more closed sessions, no more mystery consulting fees. And the most unexpected thing? 3 other HOAs in neighboring communities reached out to me. Turns out they'd been following the story, and they had questions about their own lake ownership documents. 2 of them discovered similar issues: parcels that had never been properly deeded, easements that didn't actually exist. One of them is in the middle of their own quiet title action now. I even testified at the state legislature in November. There's a bill moving through committee that would require all HOAs to verify legal ownership of common areas and file proof with the state. They're calling it the Silverbrook Transparency Act. I never thought I'd be a legislative advocate, but here we are. As for Brenda, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she pleaded guilty in October. Sentencing is scheduled for January. Her attorney worked out a deal: 18 months probation, $127,000 in restitution to the HOA, 200 hours of community service, and a 3-year suspension of her real estate license. She's also permanently barred from serving on any HOA board in the state. She and her husband put their house up for sale in November. I heard they sold it at a $15,000 loss and moved to somewhere in Georgia. I didn't celebrate when I heard that. I didn't feel victorious. Mostly, I just felt tired. But also, weirdly, grateful. Because if Brenda hadn't called the cops on me that morning, I'd still be fishing alone, lost in my grief, disconnected from everyone around me. Now I'm teaching kids to fish every Saturday. I'm helping neighbors understand their rights. I'm part of something bigger than myself, and that's worth more than any lake. It's early December now, and I'm sitting on the dock at Linda's Lake, watching the sun come up over the water. The air is cool, almost cold, and the mist is rising off the surface in thin sheets. I've got my rod